Anna Callahan. She has a great story. She founded and is now the director of the Incorruptibles.
That's right.
I already love that title. So what are the Incorruptibles?
So what we do, our mission is to fill all levels of government with Bernie Sanders. So
Him, that's a lot of work for the.
that would be a lot of work for him, with people like him. So people who represent us, not the corporations. And we do that by training activists around the country in a new and very powerful, very successful model of political organizing that came out of Richmond, California.
Okay, wait, I'm interested in powerful political models. Okay, before we get to that though, so how did you come to this movement and how did you come to start this?
So I was a software engineer and I had actually turned off all of the news because it wasn't actionable to me, and until I found out that Bernie Sanders was running for president. And when I found that out, I pretty quickly quit my job to volunteer full-time for the Bernie campaign, and I never went back. So since then, I've been volunteering. I've volunteered for a number of other organizations, and then a year or so ago, I started this group.
Anna, you're not playing. I mean, you're a software engineer and you quit what is probably a decent paying job to volunteer for Bernie Sanders. And then you don't get discouraged when he loses. And you start this group instead. So I don't know, I just think that's an amazing story. And if enough of us do things like that, it's gonna make a difference. That's what the revolution is. And that's what we're trying to feature here on Rebel Headquarters. So then tell me about the Richmond situation. What is that?
Yeah, so it's an amazing David and Goliath story that they have. The city of Richmond has a large oil refinery, and it was basically owned by Chevron for 100 years. They poured money into the political process. They had a desk inside City Hall in the 90s. And
it's actually very similar to a story very near here, El Segundo in California, Chevron refinery. In fact, the city is named after the refinery because it was the second refinery that Chevron had, and hence El Segundo.
Yeah. Oh,
okay. So I've seen it happen here in California.
That's right.
And so how did they use their power and what happened next?
Well, as is normal with corrupt cities, it was a very troubled city. So it had the second highest homicide rate in the country. It was a fairly low-wage city. It had terrible police brutality problems in a predominantly African-American and Latino population. And of course, every 10 years or so, the refinery would have an explosion or a spill, sending people to the hospital, doing environmental damage. And in 2003, residents got together and formed the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I'll call them the RPA, it's a little shorter. And their story, over the next few years, they elected a city councilor and then the mayor, who was a mayor for 8 years. It's Gail McLaughlin, who's now running for lieutenant governor. Then they got a majority, and they now maintain a super majority on the city council. That's despite millions of dollars in corporate cash. In 2014 alone, Chevron spent over $3 million trying to defeat their candidates. It's a city of 130,000 people. So you can just—
How much did they spend?
Over almost $3.5 million in a city election.
So look, let's just pause there for a second. So a giant corporation runs the city where they have their workers. And unsurprisingly, the wages are kept really low. And the people who live and work for them are kept under control by brutal cops.
Exactly.
Okay, and get back to work, get back to the mines in essence, right? And then sometimes it explodes and you die. Doesn't matter, get back to work, get back to work. But it's not that they're not willing to spend money. They do spend money to buy the politicians.
That's right.
They won't spend it on their workers, but they'll spend it on the politicians.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
So there's, from an electoral standpoint, you can say that what they did was amazing, right? In that election cycle, 2014, when Chevron spent $3 million, all three RPA candidates won, every Chevron candidate lost.
Wow,
Okay.
How'd they do that?
Well, that's the model that they use. But before I even tell you the model, I want to say that their policy accomplishments are at least as impressive as their electoral accomplishments. You and I both know that people get elected and they don't follow through, right?
Don't I know it, sister?
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of their candidates, when they got elected, followed through on every campaign promise. They reduced the homicide rate by 75%. They completely turned on the police force. It's now known as one of the top community policing police forces in the whole country. They have gotten over $100 million from Chevron in back taxes.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that part.
They passed a $15 minimum wage, and they passed the first rent control bill in the state of California in 30 years.
Amazing. So, look, I love every part of that story, and I can't wait for the ending here when you tell me how they did it. But if you're at home and you're wondering, why do the politicians always go back on their promises? There's actually a very good reason why. And it's also the same reason why these people did not go back on their promises. It's because of the financing. So their elections are financed through private financing, which is a system we have in America, which is not normal. In a lot of the rest of the world, there's public financing, so you serve the public interest. So in America, we have private financing of elections, so they serve private interests. And so they'll tell you pretty little lies to get elected, but the people who got them elected are the ones who got them their ads, who bought the ads to trick you in the first place. And the people who gave them the money to run the ads are the private interests that they actually serve. So that's why they lie to you and tell you something, then they get into office and they work for their actual boss, the people who gave them the money. But if you're uncorrupted or an incorruptible, then your boss is either the small donors or your actual constituents. And so you represent them. And that's why they actually deliver on their promises. So now, let's get to the dramatic conclusion. And I don't know this, I'm in the same boat as you guys. Yeah. So how do they do it?
Okay, it's definitely gonna be a paradigm shift. When we train people all over the country in this, very commonly they will send us messages afterwards saying, I've told everyone I know they have to take this workshop because I've never seen anything like this. And it's a 3-hour workshop, we can't go through the whole thing, but what I can do is compare the old model that pretty much everybody's doing today and the new model. So the old model has 5 steps. You'll recognize it. Everyone out there will probably recognize it who's doing any political organizing. Step 1 is to get a bunch of progressives together. Step 2 is to wait for people to announce that they're running for office. Step 3 is to pick the least bad ones. Sounds simple, but actually grassroots groups spend between 6 and 12 months doing this, spending a lot of time doing endorsements.
Yeah, just quick pause there. I know because I started a group called the Just Democrats, or I helped to start it, but the staff did the super hard work, and a lot of it was picking the right candidates. And it took a long time, and it's a ton of work to do that. So it goes underappreciated, and I think they picked wonderful candidates. Yeah.
Step 4 is to get them elected and work really hard. And that's where almost all of the training happens in this country. Just getting people elected, whether they are great, good, or mediocre. And step 5, after they're elected, when they don't do what you want, get mad. Right?
Step 5 is the most troubling part. Yes, that's the enormously frustrating. So what's this model instead?
Sure, I'll tell you 4 differences between the old model and the new model. One is that instead of reaching out to people most likely to vote, there's a year-round, every-year outreach to the people least served by government. So that helps increase voter turnout, the number of volunteers who work on the campaigns, as well as the number of people willing to run for office. As far as the candidates, it's a second way. When you wait for people to self-select, you get mostly male, mostly white, mostly rich people running for office. And you miss out on all these people who are already leaders in your city. So every city we go to is filled with leaders. Churches, PTAs, unions, third parties, ethnic communities, everywhere. So coalition building is a big part of what we do. And through that coalition to reach deep and find those people who already are doing good work and convince them the best way they can serve their community is to run for office.
So that's amazing, because that is, I mean, I didn't know this and we didn't coordinate this, but that's a lot of what the Just Democrats did. So they, for example, Cori Bush in St. Louis, who's running against an incumbent Democrat who never does what he says he's going to do. And she was the leader of the protests. And so there was outreach. Hey, would you consider running for office, right? And find local pastors, teachers, anyone who's involved in the community, who's already been a leader, and who's already shown that they care about the community.
That's exactly right, yeah. The third difference is crucial in keeping elected officials progressive. And it is a tight integration between the coalition and the elected officials, helping them to prioritize legislation, to write legislation, and to pass legislation. And what we've learned from Gail McLaughlin, as well as from other elected officials, progressive electeds that we've talked to, is that the only ones who don't have this kind of support are the progressives. So people who take big donations, their donors and party managers they're advising them on how to do things. They're writing legislation for them. They're helping them put together partners and media and everything to get that legislation passed. The only people who don't have that are the progressives, and we need to provide that support for them.
So in essence, that's a liberal version of ALEC, right? So ALEC is the corporate group that says, this is what you will pass, and here's the check that goes along with it. And a lot of times, and these are some of my favorite stories, the legislators will copy and paste, and then they'll forget to take off like the header. So they'll put into the bill like American Legislative Exchange Council, funded by, right? And they submit it. And so if we had a progressive group that helped with legislation, but that actually was representing the people, that would be amazing. Okay, what's 4?
4, this is the biggest kind of paradigm shift. And the 4th difference is, instead of focusing on campaigns, you focus on a single electoral body. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a progressive group, and you have one person for city council that you think is great, somebody for mayor, somebody for your state assembly, for state senate, for your House of Representatives, and for senator. That's 6 candidates. Let's say you work really hard, and all 6 of those people win. And let's say by miracle of miracles, every one of them remains true to their progressive values. They're probably, all 6 of them, going to be outnumbered by pro-corporate forces in every single electoral body, totally unable to pass any legislation. So what they did in Richmond was they focused on the city council, and they said, win or lose one election doesn't matter. Our goal is to win more than 50% on the city council of Richmond. Because once you get to 50%, you can pass anything you want. So as we go around, we help people to sort of strategize how they are going to take over the entire city council or the entire school board. We've done 2 statewide workshops as well. And so one of them actually chose the assembly and the other one chose the Senate in their particular state. But you focus on one body and how you can strategize and form coalitions to take over the entire body.
It is, the similarities are amazing, and I promise that we didn't coordinate this. So now Just Democrats have endorsed a couple of governors who are just amazing progressives. But overall, the idea was only, and we get criticized for this, but it's because of what you're talking about, only Congress, okay? Because we must have progressives that have enough votes in Congress to swing legislation, right? So that's why we didn't do any state races, and there's wonderful work being done by Our Revolution, Working Families Party, et cetera, at the state level, the local level, et cetera. We're like, no, concentrate all your firepower on Congress and have enough of a caucus that you're the swing vote, right? So, but still overcoming the $3.5 million is a very significant challenge. So was there any tricks of the trade there other than what you just outlined?
There are a ton of other things that we train in. And so, for example, you mentioned money in politics. I'll just mention that this is kind of the way that we approach things. Most of the advice on money in politics is what not to do. Don't take corporate money, don't take lobbyist money, don't take money from CEOs, don't take, this kind of don't do X, Y, and Z. And in our workshops, what we do is we train people in what to do. How, in fact, do you raise thousands, tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands of small dollar donations? So we have many different workshops covering different tactics. So it's not just these things that I mentioned, but that's kind of our approach, is really giving people hands-on experience in the techniques, the best practices that have worked for other people, and how they can apply them in their own city. Okay, so last thing is, how do you want people to participate? Great, so there's 2 things people can do. We are purely funded by small dollar donations. So if people can donate, that would be fantastic. We are hoping to go to swing states, red swing states, where we think we can have a lot of effect on the midterms. And then we're also having, we're launching an online learning platform now, and we're running our beta cohort. So if people want to sign up for our beta, they can do that as well.
You know that Anna was a software engineer when she says we're running our beta cohort.
True. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's the website's the Incorruptibles. Is it? Do you say us or US?
We say U.S.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you want to donate, the Incorruptibles.us/give, which is logical, and we'll have the links down below so you can click on them if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.